There are moments when life does not ask for your opinion. It does not negotiate, it does not explain itself, it simply advances, indifferent to your readiness. In such moments, the question is not whether you feel fear. Fear is natural. The question is whether fear governs you. The Stoics were acutely aware of this distinction. They did not promise tranquility as a gift of temperament, nor calm as a fortunate accident of personality. They regarded composure as a discipline, one cultivated deliberately, often under unfavorable conditions. Calm, to the Stoic, was not softness. It was strength without noise. Marcus Aurelius understood this intimately. His life was not shaped by convenience nor by theoretical adversity. He ruled during years of prolonged military conflict, internal instability, and widespread disease. He governed while surrounded by uncertainty, criticism, and the quiet awareness that every decision carried irreversible consequences. And yet, what history remembers most clearly is not his authority, but his restraint. This is not incidental. Restraint, for Marcus, was not a moral ornament. It was a survival mechanism for the mind. Panic, he believed, was never caused by events themselves. It was caused by judgment, by the haste with which the mind agreed that something was unbearable, unjust, or catastrophic. The Stoics called this agreement assent. An impression appears, danger, loss, threat. The mind rushes to affirm it. Emotion escalates, judgment collapses, panic is born in that collapse. The Stoic project was to interrupt it. Epictetus, who lived under conditions far removed from comfort or security, taught that freedom begins not with control over circumstances, but with command over one's interpretations. You cannot prevent impressions from arising. You can prevent them from ruling you. Marcus took this lesson seriously. His private writings reveal a man engaged in constant internal correction, not to inspire himself, but to restrain himself. He did not speak to his own mind gently. He spoke to it precisely. At the beginning of many days, Marcus reminded himself that difficulty was not an aberration. It was the condition of life. He anticipated obstruction, ignorance, resistance, and ingratitude, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Expectation, he understood, is the seed of panic. When you expect ease, friction feels intolerable. When you expect certainty, ambiguity feels threatening. When you expect control, resistance feels personal. Marcus expected none of these. This did not make him passive. It made him prepared. Preparation to the Stoics was not logistical. It was psychological. They rehearsed adversity in advance. They considered loss before it arrived. They familiarized themselves with discomfort so that it would not shock them into error. Seneca advised occasionally removing oneself from comfort, eating plainly, sleeping simply, reducing life to essentials, and then asking, "Is this what I feared?" The answer, invariably, was no. Familiarity dissolves panic. Novelty feeds it. Marcus lived this discipline not as an exercise, but as a necessity. Campaign life stripped away luxury. Illness weakened the body. Responsibility stripped illusion. Instead of resisting these conditions, he accepted them as training. The Stoics believed that resistance to reality multiplies suffering. Acceptance reduces it. This acceptance did not mean resignation. It meant accuracy. Marcus did not tell himself that situations were good when they were not. He refused to add interpretation where none was required. Cold was cold, fatigue was fatigue, fear was fear. None of these, by themselves, justified panic. Panic entered only when the mind exaggerated. This is unbearable. This should not be happening. This cannot be endured. Marcus disciplined his language to avoid such inflation. Words, he believed, shape perception. Inflated language inflates emotion. Precision preserves proportion. This discipline extended to action. Under pressure, Marcus did not rush. He narrowed his focus deliberately. What is required now? What lies within my control? What response aligns with reason? This narrowing is a central Stoic technique. Panic thrives on totality, on the belief that everything is at stake all at once. Stoic clarity isolates the present obligation and ignores the rest. You do not need to solve the future. You need to meet the moment. This approach allowed Marcus to act decisively without emotional escalation. Decisiveness, in his case, was not driven by fear of delay or desire for dominance. It arose from acceptance of uncertainty. Clarity does not require certainty. This insight remains profoundly countercultural. Most panic arises not from danger, but from the demand for guarantees. When the mind insists on knowing how things will turn out, it destabilizes itself. The Stoics relinquished that demand entirely. They replaced it with conduct. Do what reason permits. Accept what it does not. This principle anchored Marcus during plague, when no cure existed, and during war, when no outcome was assured. He could not save everyone. He could not control fate, but he could govern justly, restrain cruelty, and preserve coherence. That was enough. Stoicism never promised happiness. It promised dignity. Dignity, for Marcus, meant remaining internally ordered while external order dissolved. It meant not allowing fear to dictate action, not allowing anger to justify cruelty, not allowing exhaustion to excuse negligence. This required routine. Not ritual, routine. Marcus structured his days around reflection, action, and review. Each morning, he prepared his mind. Each day, he attended carefully to his duties. Each evening, he examined his conduct. This rhythm stabilized him when circumstances did not. Routine does not eliminate crisis. It contains it. The Stoics understood that panic is often a symptom of fragmentation, of days without structure, of minds without rehearsal, of values without practice. Marcus refused fragmentation. He cultivated unity between thought and action. This is why his philosophy remains alive, not because it comforts, because it holds. Once pressure becomes constant, it changes its character. It is no longer an event. It becomes an atmosphere. This is the condition in which Marcus Aurelius lived for most of his adult life. Responsibility did not arrive in waves. It settled permanently. There was no interval in which the mind could fully disengage. It is under such conditions that panic becomes especially seductive, not as hysteria, but as urgency, a persistent sense that everything matters at once, that delay is dangerous, that hesitation is failure. The Stoics regarded this as one of the most corrosive illusions of power. Urgency, they believed, is not evidence of importance. It is often evidence of confusion. Marcus trained himself to resist this illusion deliberately. He did not deny the weight of responsibility. He denied its right to overwhelm judgment. The central Stoic distinction guided him here: the separation between what depends upon us and what does not. Epictetus insisted that peace begins only when this boundary is clearly drawn. Everything that lies beyond it must be relinquished without complaint. This is not passivity, it is discipline. Marcus could not control outcomes. He could not guarantee loyalty. He could not command fortune. What he could govern was the quality of his reasoning, the proportionality of his response, and the integrity of his conduct. By confining attention to this domain, he preserved mental stability. Decisions still carried risk, consequences still followed, but panic was deprived of its narrative. Another major source of panic the Stoics identified was ego under threat. When situations deteriorate, panic often arises not from danger itself, but from injury to self-image. How will this reflect on me? What will others think? What if I appear weak, mistaken, insufficient? Marcus addressed this directly in his private reflections. He reminded himself repeatedly that reputation is external. It does not belong to us. It fluctuates beyond control and cannot be secured through anxiety. To panic over reputation is to surrender one's judgment to an audience that will never be satisfied. Seneca was unequivocal on this point. The man who lives for approval lives in bondage. Marcus refused such bondage. This refusal granted him an unusual freedom under criticism. He could be accused, misjudged, even maligned, without internal collapse. Panic requires identification with appearance. Stoicism dissolves that identification. Another discipline that insulated Marcus from panic was voluntary exposure to discomfort. This practice is frequently misunderstood. The Stoics did not seek hardship as a badge of virtue. They sought familiarity with discomfort in order to strip it of terror. Seneca advised deliberately reducing one's standard of living from time to time, eating plain food, sleeping without indulgence, and then observing the mind's response. What I feared, he noted, was not the thing itself, but my imagination of it. Marcus lived under conditions that made this exercise unavoidable. Campaigns were austere. Illness weakened the body. Luxury was often inaccessible. Instead of resisting this, he treated it as preparation. When discomfort becomes familiar, panic loses its leverage. Panic feeds on novelty. Discipline feeds on repetition. Another Stoic insight Marcus relied upon was this: speed is hostile to judgment. Panic accelerates thought. Clarity decelerates assent. Marcus did not respond immediately when provoked. He delayed agreement with his impressions. This pause, often brief but deliberate, was enough to prevent escalation. Epictetus taught that impressions arrive involuntarily, but assent is always optional. Feeling fear is not failure. Obeying it without examination is. Marcus rehearsed refusal. What exactly is happening? Is this as severe as it appears? Will panic improve the response? The answer, consistently, was no. Panic never improves judgment. It narrows perspective, hardens posture, and accelerates error. Calm, by contrast, is not inert. It is tactical. Another source of panic the Stoics identified was attachment to control. The desire to dominate outcomes creates fragility. When reality resists, the mind fractures. The Stoics relinquished the illusion of control entirely. Not control of effort, control of events. Marcus wrote that attempting to control what cannot be controlled is a form of madness. Madness breeds panic. Acceptance restores proportion. This acceptance did not render Marcus indifferent. It made him effective. Energy previously wasted on resistance was redirected into action. Another essential Stoic practice was perspective. Marcus frequently widened his mental frame. He reminded himself of time, scale, and impermanence. He imagined cities as fleeting, generations passing, achievements dissolving. This exercise did not trivialize responsibility. It contextualized it. When everything feels urgent, nothing can be prioritized. Perspective restores hierarchy. Fear thrives in isolation. Perspective reconnects context. Language discipline also played a decisive role. Marcus warned himself against exaggeration, against saying, "This is unbearable," when it was merely demanding, against saying, "This is catastrophic," when it was merely uncertain. Words shape experience. Inflated language inflates emotion. Precise language preserves command. Another stabilizing element was routine. Not rigidity, continuity. When external conditions are unstable, routine anchors the nervous system. Marcus maintained a rhythm even amid war. Reflection, action, correction. This rhythm did not eliminate crisis. It contained it. Finally, Marcus recognized that panic often arises from exhaustion. Fatigued minds catastrophize. Discipline without recovery collapses. The Stoics did not glorify depletion. They valued sustainability. Marcus rested when possible. He conserved energy deliberately, because clarity requires capacity. At the end of each day, he did not measure success by outcome. He measured it by alignment. Did I act in accordance with reason? Did I preserve proportion? Did I restrain impulse? This evaluation reframed life. Success became ethical rather than external, and ethical success does not panic. It endures. There exists a category of pressure that cannot be resolved. It does not respond to effort. It does not retreat with time. It does not yield to optimism. It must be endured. This was the pressure Marcus Aurelius came to know most intimately. Not episodic crisis, but sustained exposure to uncertainty. War without decisive conclusion, illness without clear recovery, responsibility without respite. In such conditions, panic appears rational. It presents itself not as hysteria, but as urgency dressed in realism. The Stoics rejected this persuasion entirely. They understood that when pressure cannot be removed, reaction becomes the decisive factor. The external burden remains constant. The internal response determines whether the mind fractures or stabilizes. Marcus did not attempt to eliminate fear. He refused to grant it authority. Fear, to the Stoics, was a physiological response, neither virtuous nor shameful. Panic emerged only when fear was promoted to governance. Epictetus was explicit. Emotions arise involuntarily, but judgments are chosen. Marcus trained himself to live in this distinction. Nowhere was this more necessary than in the face of mortality. Death, for Marcus, was not an abstraction. It was immediate, visible, recurrent. Disease carried it through camps and cities alike. Youth offered no immunity, status offered no exemption. Rather than avert his gaze, Marcus turned deliberately toward it. Memento mori, as he practiced it, was not morbidity. It was calibration. You could leave life at this moment, he reminded himself. This was not a threat, but a clarification. When life is understood as finite, panic loses much of its leverage. Fear often feeds on imagined continuity. Death interrupts that illusion. When time is recognized as limited, trivial anxiety dissolves. Only essential action remains. The Stoics believed that fear of death underlies much human panic. Remove its mystery, and fear loses power. Epictetus stated it without ornament. You cannot escape death, but you can escape cowardice. Marcus accepted this without drama. He did not romanticize mortality. He did not rush toward danger. He simply refused to let fear dictate conduct. Another severe test of Stoic discipline arises with irreversibility. Many of Marcus's decisions could not be undone. Errors would not be corrected. Consequences would not soften. Modern anxiety often stems from imagined stakes. Marcus lived with genuine ones. And yet, paralysis did not define him, because Stoicism redefined responsibility. Marcus did not hold himself accountable for outcomes. He held himself accountable for reasoning. Did I deliberate carefully? Did I act justly? Did I respond proportionally? If so, the result belonged to fate. This separation preserved decisiveness. Panic thrives where responsibility is totalized, when one believes oneself answerable not only for action, but for fortune itself. The Stoics refused this burden. Another pressure Marcus endured was moral fatigue. Years of command exhaust compassion. Constant exposure to incompetence and malice tempts cynicism. Marcus anticipated this corrosion. He reminded himself that most wrongdoing arises from ignorance, not malice. This interpretation preserved restraint. Panic dehumanizes. Clarity humanizes. By refusing to personalize the failures of others, Marcus reduced internal conflict. He did not excuse wrongdoing. He refused to amplify it emotionally. Another critical Stoic concept emerges here: the inner citadel. Marcus believed that regardless of external turmoil, the mind could remain ordered. This was not metaphorical, it was practical. He trained himself to retreat inwardly, not as escape, but as insulation. External chaos did not penetrate unless invited. Insults did not injure unless accepted. Fear did not command unless obeyed. Panic did not arise unless authorized. This internal sovereignty defined Stoic resilience. The Stoics did not deny suffering. They denied its authority over judgment. Another source of panic they identified was meaninglessness. Extended hardship erodes purpose. When effort appears futile, panic mutates into despair. Marcus confronted this directly. He did not promise himself that life would be fair, nor that virtue would be rewarded. Instead, he anchored meaning in conduct itself. To act justly is meaningful. To restrain excess is meaningful. To perform one's duty is meaningful. Meaning, in Stoicism, is not granted by outcome. It is generated by alignment. This position is severe. It offers no consolation prize, but it removes panic's final weapon, the fear that suffering is pointless. When meaning resides in action, it cannot be taken. Marcus further reduced panic through historical humility. He reminded himself that empires dissolve, names fade, achievements vanish. This was not nihilism, it was relief. When one accepts transience, the ego relaxes, pressure eases, duty remains, but without theatrical weight. Marcus did not aim for remembrance. He aimed for correctness. This distinction preserved his mental equilibrium. As his health deteriorated, pain became constant. Sleep was irregular. The body weakened. Yet discipline persisted. Morning preparation, measured action, evening review. This routine was not inspirational, it was stabilizing. In extreme conditions, stability is survival. Marcus Aurelius did not avoid crisis. He inhabited it without surrendering himself to it. This is the Stoic art at its highest expression. Not the elimination of fear, the refusal to panic. At the conclusion of Stoic thought, there is no promise of ease. There is composure. Marcus Aurelius did not expect life to grow lighter. He expected the mind to grow firmer. This expectation shaped everything. It is here that Stoicism is most often misunderstood. It is not an aesthetic of calm. It is not emotional withdrawal. It is not indifference masquerading as wisdom. It is governance. The governance of judgment. The refusal to surrender the mind to fear, impulse, or excess. By the later years of his life, Marcus Aurelius had abandoned all romantic notions of existence. He knew that order is temporary, that health fades, that institutions strain, and that effort does not guarantee success. What remained was discipline, and discipline, to the Stoics, was freedom. Freedom from panic, freedom from resentment, freedom from illusion. Marcus ceased asking reality to comply with his preferences. Instead, he refined his capacity to comply with reality. This is the decisive shift. Panic is born from negotiation with what already is. Calm emerges when negotiation ends. The Stoics understood that panic is not caused by adversity, but by resistance to it. Reality does not respond to emotional intensity. It responds to action, or not at all. Marcus disciplined himself to distinguish urgency from importance. Panic collapses this distinction. Reason restores it. Not everything that demands attention deserves reaction. Not everything that feels critical truly is. This discernment is the foundation of Stoic steadiness. Epictetus expressed it simply. Freedom begins when we clearly distinguish what depends on us from what does not. Inside that boundary lies effort. Outside it lies acceptance. Confusing the two produces anxiety. Separating them produces peace. The Stoics also understood that panic often disguises itself as care. People panic because they care deeply about results, about others, about meaning. Stoicism does not reduce care, it refines it. Caring without discipline exhausts the soul. Caring with discipline sustains it. Marcus loved his family. He valued justice. He honored duty. But he did not permit attachment to distort judgment. He accepted loss as the price of love, impermanence as the condition of life. This acceptance did not diminish affection, it purified it. Another insight the Stoics recognized was that panic is transmissible. A leader who panics amplifies instability. A parent who panics transmits insecurity. A colleague who panics fractures cohesion. Calm, by contrast, stabilizes. Marcus did not stabilize others by offering certainty. He stabilized them by embodying proportion. This remains the Stoic contribution to leadership, not authority without emotion, but authority with regulation. Emotional regulation is not repression, it is command. The Stoics trained this command deliberately. They refined their language, they corrected their thoughts, they examined their reactions. Marcus warned himself not to say, "This is unbearable," when it was merely demanding, not to dramatize discomfort into catastrophe. Language shapes experience. Exaggeration fuels panic. Precision preserves clarity. Another stabilizing practice was sober gratitude. Not gratitude as optimism, but as inventory. What still functions? What remains intact? Reason remains. Choice remains. The capacity for virtue remains. When panic rises, inventory restores proportion. The Stoics also countered panic by dissolving isolation. They reminded themselves that suffering is not unique, that others before them endured the same trials, that no one is singled out by fate. Perspective dissolves self-pity. Self-pity feeds panic. By the final years of his life, Marcus reduced his philosophy to its barest form. Act rightly, accept outcomes. Do not embellish either. This is not resignation. It is strength without ornament. The Stoics never believed life owed them meaning. They generated meaning through conduct. And conduct does not panic. It acts. If there is one conclusion to draw from this entire reflection, it is this. Panic is not a failure of courage. It is a failure of preparation. The Stoics prepared daily, not for success, for difficulty. They rehearsed adversity, they examined impressions, they disciplined reaction, they corrected themselves nightly. This made composure available under pressure. Not guaranteed, available. And availability is everything. Because where panic recedes, choice returns. And where choice returns, dignity survives. If you have followed this reflection to its end, you are not seeking stimulation. You are seeking orientation, a way of standing when certainty dissolves. That is what Stoicism offers. Not comfort, alignment. If this way of thinking resonates, you may choose to remain within this conversation, not by habit, but by intention. You may subscribe, not as a gesture, but as a quiet commitment to depth over noise. You may share this with one person whose judgment you respect, someone who would engage with it, not skim it. And if you choose to leave a considered comment, you participate in something increasingly rare, a culture of reflection rather than reaction. Whatever you decide, remember this. You do not need to control events. You need to command your response. That is the Stoic discipline, and it remains available each time you choose clarity over impulse.